Good afternoon. This is Critical Talk with Amina McLeod, Maldine, who has no voice. And I'm going to sit back and listen to a conversation about law and lives with two distinguished professors and lawyers, Stephen Butler and Joe Margulis, who I'm going to ask to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about what they do.
Stephen, why don't you go first?
All right. Appreciate it, Professor. Stephen Butler. I'm Assistant Dean for Advancement at Oklahoma City University School of Law. I essentially run their fundraising program as well as oversee our marketing and communication efforts and our alumni relations, our alumni affairs. Before that, I worked at Pepperdine, excuse me, which is now the Pepperdine Caruso School of Law in Malibu. My initial background after law school was in community organizing, where I worked in South Central Los Angeles as well as in Dallas, helping communities and everyday folks build power to create change in their neighborhoods and in their communities. I went to the University of Oklahoma for undergraduate in law school, and I'm a native of Tulsa, Oklahoma, Black Wall Street, and just happy to be here.
Well, I'm Joe Margulis. I'm a professor of law and government at Cornell University in upstate New York. I'm trained as a lawyer, and I've been a civil rights and a criminal defense lawyer for many years. And most of my work as a lawyer was either in criminal defense or aspects of the criminal justice system, like civil rights associated with police misconduct or prison misconduct. And I've also been very involved in the post 9/11 litigation, representing folks at Guantanamo and detainees who are held in other places around the world. I'm also very, very happy to be here.
All right, so I believe we're going to start with some definitions. And I believe Doc wanted us to begin with definitions such as assailant.
Well, I think that what we're going to be talking about today, I feel so bad that Dr. McLeod can't join us, and we'll have to muddle through inadequately, I'm sure. But I think what we were going to be talking about is the Ahmaud Arbery murder. Ahmaud Arbery was a young man, 25 years old, who was jogging in a little town near his home in East Georgia, a town called Brunswick, when he was chased down by residents. This is not a police killing. These were residents who were acting pursuant to a citizen's arrest statute. They cornered him. They struggled with him, and they shot. Well, one of them shot him several times. And I think that and I think that's the case that we're going to chat about today. And just to give us some, so everybody understands the language, maybe define some terms. Is that what you mean, Stephen?
I believe that's right.
So
we have some video. Let's show the video.
Oh, you have the video of the shooting. Okay.
Brunswick Communications, Operator Smith.
Hey, yeah, I'm about to do tours.
Okay.
Breakers out here. There's a guy in the house right now. The house under construction.
Okay. Do you have your address or the other house's address?
Right at 219 or 220 Secilla Drive.
And you said someone's breaking into it right now?
No, it's all open. It's under construction. And he's running right now. There he goes right now.
Okay, what is he doing?
running down the street. Whole thing.
Okay. Well, let me tell you a little bit about what you just saw and what you just heard. Ahmaud Arbery was jogging in Brunswick. He came upon a house that was under construction.
Mm-hmm.
And it was open, as that person who just called said. And he wandered through the construction site. Apparently, a lot of people had wandered through the construction site. There were surveillance cameras that were present at the site, and confirmed that people routinely walked through the construction site, children, adults, and evidently Mr. Arbery also walked through. And after a couple minutes there, he started jogging again. Well, while he was walking through, a neighbor across the street called and reported an unknown person present in a house.
Mm-hmm.
And you heard the dispatcher say, so he broke in? He did not break in. There was no break in because there was no house to break into. It was a construction.
Right.
And the caller thinks that he's doing something more sinister. Apparently nobody else called when, children were walking through.
Mm-hmm.
You make the association between a young black man and crime. And so he called up, and you heard him say, oh, he's running now, as though he were running away. In fact, what happened is Ahmaud Arbery continued his jogging.
Right.
That's how this whole thing, that's part of how this whole thing started.
Right. And you've done some writing about the fact that he was jogging through the home. The person called it in, saying that something potentially sinister was going on, but the people who actually owned the home and were not aware of any of this until after the shooting had taken place. So again, to this point of people taking the law into their own hands, this idea of protecting the rights of individuals who, to the extent that the rights were violated, it was a minor crime, trespass. There was no theft. There was nothing was stolen.
Right.
And they were not even aware of individuals going through the home necessarily until after this shooting had taken place.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. The people who own the home don't live in Brunswick. They live 2 hours away.
Right.
They didn't learn about this until long, long after the shooting took place. And when they looked at the surveillance camera, they confirmed that Arbery didn't do anything that anybody else had done.
Right.
Hadn't done. And they did not ask that anybody call the police on him. They didn't ask that anybody race him down, track him down. This was all done citizens on their own.
Right. This is by their own volition.
Correct. And it's important to understand. So what happened is, and it's not clear that these things are connected. Somebody called the police, and then while Arbery is jogging, two other people see him jogging through the neighborhood, and what they report to what the media reports is that they think he looked like someone who had been involved in a burglary before, not Arbery, but just some. So it's not even clear that they knew about this prior trespass. It appears as though they're simply reacting, oh, he looks like a guy who might have been involved in a burglary before. And they decide to chase him down armed, relying on the law of citizen's arrest in Georgia, because they think he's fleeing from, that he's was involved in a burglary sometime in the past.
Right.
What is a citizen's arrest?
So citizen's arrest, it's codified by law. It exists in statutes in Georgia. It exists in almost every state. And it allows, it's an anachronistic, it goes back for centuries. It was designed to allow shop owners and homeowners to seize somebody, to hold on to somebody who they caught shoplifting or like burglarizing their garage or something like that, while the police could be summoned.
Right.
Because ordinarily, if the police, if a private citizen grabs hold of somebody and won't let them move, that's a civil violation. That's a tort, or it's it's false imprisonment, or it's kidnapping. So this authorizes a person to do that if they see the person committing a crime.
But you got to explain, Stephen, that a tort is harm.
Well, and also, Joe, I believe you're just writing around the fact that this requires a reasonable. You have to see, and you have to have this reasonable belief that a crime was committed. And I believe that's the law in Georgia, correct?
Yeah, so Georgia expanded the statute. The typical understanding of it is if you see the person shoplifting, for instance, right? If you're a shop owner and you see a kid stealing apples, you can hold on to him, right? Because you have direct knowledge of the crime. Georgia expanded the statute, like other states as well. And they said, even if you don't have direct knowledge, if you reasonably believe that he's fleeing from a felony,
Right.
then you can chase him down. You don't have to have direct knowledge. If you reasonably believe that he's fleeing from a felony, you can chase him down.
And is this, here's the deal, is it specifically a felony? Because that's going to play a big role when it comes down to trial, that is it that it has to, you have to reasonably suspect someone of a felony, because of course they'll say that's reason for them to try to tie this to the burglaries, right? On previously, you only reasonably suspect him of trespass, then again, regardless of what you didn't see, if you can only reasonably suspect him of trespass, that no longer gives you the right to participate in a citizen's arrest.
That is exactly right. That is exactly right. So let's just sort of make clear the facts here. The fact is that Ahmaud Arbery was not fleeing from a felony. There was no lawful basis to chase him down and seize him. He was not fleeing. He was not engaged in a felony, and he wasn't fleeing from a felony. Unfortunately, the law says if they reasonably believe that he was, even if they're mistaken, if they reasonably believe that he was, then they have a right to chase him down. So the question is not whether he in fact was, the question for the purposes of the criminal law, fleeing from a felony, it's whether they reasonably believed it. And that's the slippery part, right? Because they're going to say, well, I'm sorry, we thought he was fleeing from a burglary. And a jury of their peers will judge whether that was a reasonable attempt.
But does that give you the right to take a life?
Well, I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
Well, I was going to say that's the question that we're going to see, because while we have a personal sense about whether that's right or wrong, again, it's going to go into what do the jury of the McMichaels and Mr. Bryan's peers believe they reasonably have a right to do.
Right. And Dr. McLeod's question is, all right, it's one thing for them to chase him down.
Mm-hmm.
Can they chase him down while armed? And can they shoot him? Right? Those are different things.
Right.
Unfortunately, there you have to introduce two additional Georgia laws. One is very permissive gun laws.
Mm-hmm.
Ever since the Supreme Court decision in Heller in 2008, which authorized private ownership of guns, it has become much easier for people to carry guns in public. And Georgia is a state with very permissive gun ownership and gun carry laws.
Right.
From what we can tell, the McMichaels, the two people who shot him down, who chased him down, were Greg and Travis McMichael, father and son. And Travis McMichael is the one who shot him, the younger. And as far as we can tell, they were authorized to carry guns in Georgia.
Correct.
So, and if they have a right to engage in a citizen's arrest, wherever they are, if they have a right to be there, they also have a right to be there armed. So the first thing is Georgia law gives them a right to carry a gun as they're going about their business, which in this case may have included the right to chase somebody down. So that's citizen's arrest and permissive carry laws.
Right.
And then the third thing is, which is stand your ground self-defense laws. Georgia, like a majority of states in the country, passed in 2005, changed its self-defense laws. Customarily, the law of self-defense requires that if you can retreat outside your home, you must. If you're engaged in a conflict and you can back away from it, the interest in preserving life requires that you back away. That changed in 2005 with something called Stand Your Ground. In other places, it's called the Make My Day law. Some states actually put that name.
Right.
And it authorizes a person to use deadly force if they are confronted with the threat of serious bodily harm or death without retreating.
Right.
And you just saw it on that video when Ahmaud Arbery stood his ground because he was being chased through the neighborhood. And when he finally, knowing that he can't outrun a shotgun, stood his ground and engaged in resistance with Travis McMichael, McMichael says, all right, that authorizes me to use deadly force.
Well, and it is,
that's his defense. Now, whether it'll succeed, the question for the jury will be whether he reasonably needed to use
deadly
force in that moment.
And it very much echoes of George Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin, this idea of a stand your ground law coming into play in a situation in which the person who was killed was one, unarmed, and you could make the argument did not, or not even make the argument, but did not initiate the situation. And it's hard to even make the argument that they escalated the situation because they were more provoked and were defending themselves. And in the matter of defending themselves, then have the stand your ground law used against them to justify their killing.
That is exactly right. I could not say that better. That was exactly right. And in fact, in the Zimmerman case, the jury, that was a Florida case, if people will recall, where George Zimmerman was part of a neighborhood watch group and saw Trayvon Martin in a neighborhood, didn't recognize him. There too, there had been burglaries. He thought that Mr. Martin looked suspicious. The police dispatcher told him to stand down, told him not to pursue him. Zimmerman did nonetheless, confronted Martin. Martin had done nothing wrong, absolutely nothing wrong. Got into an argument. Zimmerman and Martin got into an argument. The facts at that point are a little unclear because Martin was dead, and so all we have is Zimmerman's account of it.
Right.
But the jury concluded that he reasonably feared for his life and was authorized to stand his ground and use deadly force on the innocent Trayvon Martin, who was killed.
Let's cue up Trayvon.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand, Dr. McLeod.
I said, let us cue up Trayvon. Video.
Oh, we have the video of the Martin? Yeah.
Details about the tragic shooting death of that unarmed teen in Florida. Prosecutors announced Tuesday that a grand jury will hear evidence of the killing of 17-year-old Trayvon Martin. The federal government is also looking at the case. And now this morning, we're hearing new details about his final tragic moments. ABC's Matt Gutman is in Sanford, Florida with those. Good morning to you, Matt.
Hey, good morning, Josh. We now know that in the moments before he was shot dead, Trayvon Martin knew he was being followed. He was running scared, and that the man chasing him, neighborhood watchman George Zimmerman, muttered something under his breath, which many people believe was a racial slur.
This morning, as the U.S. Justice Department begins investigating.
Yeah, I mean, And it was similar in Arbery. Arbery was fleeing from these guys. They tried to cut him off. He turned and fled the other way. They're following him in pickup trucks, the Travis and Greg McMichael in one, and another resident named William Bryan in the other. This is according to the allegation anyway. Following him in another, cutting him off again. He flees the other way again. Finally, they cut him off again, and Travis McMichael jumps out of the bed of the truck, I can't remember if he was in the bed or if he was driving.
I believe he was in the bed.
He was in the bed and confronts him with the shotgun. And you caught a little snippet. You could hear one of the shots on the video. That video was taken, by the way, by the second pursuer, William Bryan, from his dash.
Right.
So if a black man saw a white person trespassing, he could shoot him.
I don't know. Well, let me say this. I've not heard of any instance. So perhaps Professor Margulies knows of an instance in which that has happened and there has been a citizen's arrest, promulgated by an African American against a white person. I've not heard of one. It's hard for me to see that happening and given and the same result happening.
Well, what is the rule of law?
Well, the law is written in race neutral terms. And if anybody thinks that that's sufficient to answer the question, you're deluding yourselves.
Yes.
Look, Stand Your Ground has been around for about 15 years. There have been a lot of Stand Your Ground shootings.
Where does it come from?
Well, let me give you the history of Stand Your Ground. But first, let me answer this question that you asked about: if all the shoes were on the other foot, would it be how would it come out? And scholars have looked at this question. They've examined all the so-called Stand Your Ground shootings. That is, shootings that take place where the person alleges that he was merely standing his ground. And the fact is, in the configuration present in this kind of case, which is a single shooter, a single victim who don't otherwise know each other, and the use of a firearm, if it's a white shooting a black, it is 4 times more likely to be found reasonable, that is justified, than if it is a black shooting a white.
Gotcha.
So
it sounds like there have been cases then.
I'm not aware of a case. No, what Dr. McLeod asked is, can you shoot a person for trespassing? And
so you're saying these Stand Your Ground cases include felonies, someone at their own home who failed to who decided I'm not going to retreat, instead I'm going to shoot, and in those cases it's 4 times less likely for an African American to be found reasonable under those circumstances than when a white person shoots an African American.
That's correct. That's right.
Gotcha. But yeah,
every set of circumstances involving a Stand Your Ground shooting like this one, that is single shooter, single victim, didn't previously know each other, and the manner in which they stood their ground was a firearm.
Right.
When both facts are present, it's just a jury is much more likely to find it reasonable, that is justified under the law, when it is a white on black shooting rather than a black on white shooting.
And to Dr. McLeod's point, it would be interesting to see if there, in this universe of cases, right, where it has been found reasonable, which even though it's 4 times less likely for an African American to shoot a white person, and for it to be seen as reasonable, if there are any cases in there in which the white person is unarmed and is not committing a felony, but is committing a misdemeanor or less, but the African American still felt reasonably justified and was not convicted and given jail time.
Right. That's the question. If you pick up these exact same facts or the exact same facts in the Trayvon Martin murder.
Something very similar, right.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Equivalent facts.
Yeah.
I'm not aware of one. I've never heard about one.
Right.
And my strong suspicion is that it happened. If it happened, that man would be convicted of murder. That African American man would be convicted of murder.
Then what you all are telling me is that we need to write some articles, because where's the rule of law?
Well, the rule of law is imminent. I mean, it's everywhere. It's all around us. However, when you go back to the Arbery case and the Trayvon Martin case, this idea of reasonableness, and what I see is a law that's written in a way that has given enough leeway for an individual to take the law into their own hands, depending on the facts. And part of me, I'm not trying to disparage the prosecutors in the Trayvon Martin case, but say that again.
I want to disparage them. I'm not a prosecutor.
Here's the deal. Trying cases is hard. Trying high-profile murder cases is incredibly hard. But part of me wonders, if we were to look back through the trial transcripts, what could have been done differently, or are there things that could have been done differently in the Martin case that could have closed some of this wiggle room that George Zimmerman's defense counsel was able to create? And Joe, you probably studied the case way more, and so I'd be curious about your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I don't think that this is a situation that is solved by simply getting better lawyers in the courtroom. Mm-hmm. The statute authorizes an acquittal so long as a jury of George Zimmerman's peers thinks he was acting as a reasonable white man. Mm. And as long as Greg and Travis's peers, and they live in a overwhelmingly white judicial district that went overwhelmingly for President Trump in the 2016 election, if they reasonably think that they acted as reasonable white men in Brunswick, Georgia, authorized to carry a gun and authorized to use a gun if they are presented with a reasonable threat, then they're going to say it's okay. It's a problem with the statute, in other words, not with the prosecutors in the courtroom.
Well,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Doctor.
Explain the difference.
If the statute didn't authorize
a law.
Well, if
it's essentially the same thing. I mean, once the law becomes enacted, it becomes a statute, and it's the law of the land.
Right.
So, I mean, those are equivalent terms. But I'm curious to hear what you think, Doc or Joe, around what could have been done with regard to the law and how it could have been written better.
Look, it all went south when Georgia changed the conventional understanding of citizen's arrest. If you limit it to, you can engage in a citizen's arrest if you see someone committing a crime, and you stop right there, then they didn't have any right to pursue him, right? Because they didn't see a crime. They saw a young man jogging through a neighborhood. They said, oh, I think that's the guy who was burglarizing houses. They were wrong about that. They were wrong. But the only reason that sentence mattered is because the second sentence in the Georgia statute authorized them to pursue someone who was fleeing from a felony. Well, look, if you limit citizen's arrest to, I saw this, right? I have firsthand knowledge, then Ahmaud Arbery's alive today.
Well, and I would, here's another thought, Joe. Is there room or a place for citizens' arrest in 2020. I mean, citizens arrest predates the 13th Amendment, which we know has been used to continue slavery, in fact, because if you commit a crime, then guess what? Slavery is still allowed, right?
Yeah.
13th Amendment and the freeing of the slaves is not allowed to you when you're convicted of a crime. And so we're talking about these 18th century constructs that have now continued into the 19th, 20th, and 21st century, and given the behemoths that are our police apparatus and our police organizations, do we fully need, or is there a place for citizens arrest?
Right. I agree with that. I mean, one change would be limit it back to what it was, in the 17th century. But it was passed at a time when the police were not everywhere and you couldn't just pick up the phone and dial 911.
Well, you didn't have facial recognition software.
Right.
You didn't have cameras on our
everybody's surviving. Right. Exactly.
There was no GPS tracking.
I'm with you. The best solution is just to get rid of this idea of citizens arrest.
Right.
When you add in citizens arrest with, that is, empowering people to seize other folks because they believe that they have seen a crime, let alone pursue someone, which is even worse.
Right.
You're going to get into uncertainty. Well, did I see something that was criminal, or maybe I'm just mistaken? Right, and you're allowing a citizen to make that judgment on the scene in a rapidly unfolding situation.
Right.
And they might be armed because they're also allowed to carry firearms now. So
Right.
you can increase the likelihood of these kind of lethal, violent, and potentially lethal encounters. It's just, if you combine citizens arrest and gun laws the way they have, and particularly if you add in stand your ground, it's just a recipe for this sort of thing to happen. And in fact, as we're discussing, it does happen. It's Ahmaud Arbery it's an outrageous fact pattern, but it's really very similar to Trayvon Martin.
Right. We
Joe,
talk about
let me ask a very strange question. What is wrong with you white folks that y'all keep doing this crap?
That's not a strange question, and let me not laugh at it. Let me take that seriously, because that is a serious question. First of all, you're a careful scholar, and so you know that it's the same thing that it would be wrong for someone to say, "What is it with you black folk?" Right?
Don't you dare! Don't dare!
What's that?
Don't dare!
But we can't generalize. But what we can say is that for many years, it's been decades, there's been a very strong association in the white mind between black and criminality, and between criminality and black. So when whites see black, they think crime. When they see crime, they think black.
Right.
And so the presence of Ahmaud Arbery in the house where other people had been, the unfinished construction site, takes on a more sinister, menacing, dangerous, criminal tone. Why? Because he's a young black man. Not because of anything he did, not because he did anything different than a whole lot of people.
Right.
And so he is criminalized by virtue of his presence, his young black male presence. And that's the root of it.
Yeah.
That's the root of it.
I want to switch a little bit. Can I cue up Eric Gardner?
Oh, Eric Gardner.
I want to talk because these involve different aspects of the same thing, but different aspects.
Okay.
So, yeah, sure.
In the video, you can see 43-year-old Eric Garner confronted by two plainclothes officers for allegedly peddling illegal cigarettes. The officers move in to arrest him. One of them puts his forearm around Garner's neck. More police join in, pinning him to the ground as he cries out. The father of 6 was rushed to a local hospital where he died.
Yeah, I've seen that tape so many times. And of course, it all came back to me after the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. This use of restraints that involve pushing against someone's neck.
Right.
And another young black man, gasping that he couldn't breathe.
Right.
Yeah.
Joe, I think you are stronger than me. There are many times when these events have unfolded. For instance, I've never watched the Tamir Rice, any type of video around that. Read about it, seen the facts, but it's almost, and my pastor talked about this a few weeks back, the level of trauma that we take on having to watch those videos over and over again almost becomes too much. Even if it's not you, the fact that the victims continually look like you, or a family member of yours, or a child, and so it just becomes this nightmare to have to live over and over. And as a scholar who writes in this area, and you have to get all the information, and it's a lot. It takes a lot out of you.
No, I understand. And I understand intellectually. And that's all I can do is understand it intellectually. African-American colleagues of mine say very much the same thing, that they just can't watch the videos.
Mm-hmm.
There have been too many, and they're too painful. They're too real. And as you see George Floyd, for instance, for 8 minutes and 46 seconds,
right,
gasping and pleading, and the residents nearby pleading with the officers to let him up. The flashes that go through your brain, and this could be my brother, this could be my uncle, this could be my nephew, this could be my son. It is. It's not like trauma. It is trauma.
It is trauma. That's right. I remember being a community organizer in Los Angeles, in South Central, and having a mom tell me that her son had suffered PTSD. And, at the time, I'm a 30-year-old young man, not being familiar with the territory and not understanding it. And it seems sensationalized. And now in my 40s and having my own family and seeing some of the things that I, through video that, was not exposed to living in Los Angeles or growing up in Los Angeles, and being continually having to deal with police in different arenas. I can see how a child grows up with PTSD.
Absolutely. I mean, in some neighborhoods, the violence and the repercussions of violence are ever present. And sometimes it's official violence of the sort that, is the Eric Garner and the George Zimmerman. Sometimes it's neighborhood violence.
Right.
They're not the same thing.
Right.
Violence is, you're paying for that, right? I mean, the police are, supposed to be public servants. That's a qualitatively different thing. But it's traumatizing that, look, there's a lot of evidence on this. You come through those neighborhoods, you have greater stress levels, hypertension, more likely to have all sorts of health problems, underperformance at school, because how can you study when you come to school frightened, when you come to school worried about your safety? How can you concentrate?
Well, and Joe, to that point, that the idea of state sanctioned violence, if you're in a neighborhood and you're worried about the police, and you feel as if you got to not only worry about the police in addition to the other types of violence going on in your neighborhood, many of us can't understand that, but we understand the idea of if you were in a home and your parents are supposed to be the people who protect you and keep you safe, and yet you're dealing with abuse inside your home, right? That's very much like what some people feel are dealing with from the violence, police violence within their communities.
Right, I agree, and it's not what happens is. Look, let me not say like I'm an authority because I have lived in neighborhoods like this. In fact, I used to live very, very close to where George Floyd was murdered. I used to live and work in Minneapolis, and both my home and my office were very close to where George Floyd was killed. I know that street corner, et cetera. But you know, I experienced this in a very different way, obviously, because of the privilege of being, you know, a tall white man, right? So I just have a very different experience of the world, and I'm completely cognizant of that. But what I
Can you talk about that different experience of the world? How do you experience? You can get me later. Right now, I want to know.
How I experience the world versus look, I mean, I've been stopped and frisked before. In fact, I was stopped and frisked in Minneapolis. The police officer was, you know, firm but polite. It didn't last very long. It wasn't humiliating. It wasn't degrading. She didn't insult me. She wasn't disrespectful. It took 10 seconds and I was on my way. I happened to be in a neighborhood. I was working. I was a criminal defense lawyer, and I was working in a neighborhood on my way to go talk to a client of mine. And there was suddenly a report of shots fired, and police showed up, and they didn't have any other information except for shots fired. And they see I was younger then. I had a lot more hair then. They see a young man walking in the neighborhood. They didn't know what else, and so they searched me. Look. My experience is just completely different than the experience of, you know, young Black men for whom there is this reflexive association between Blackness and violence, between young Black and dangerous, and the police, many police, not every officer and not every city. It's important to understand that, but many officers in urban areas just look at that young man differently. And you know, it creates a stress level and a burden on him that I'll just never, ever endure. My son won't endure it. He didn't endure it growing up in those same neighborhoods. It's just not the same. And it's important to understand that. It's important to understand how your privilege manifests itself as you walk down the street every single day. I tell that to my students. When I walk into a class, what do you see? You see a tall, white man with a deep voice, with no deformities, no speech malfunctions, right? The picture of authority in the United States. And I didn't do anything to deserve that. I was just born into it. I can take no credit for it at all, but I'm the benefactor of that just because of who I am.
Okay, let's look.
Prosecutors say Officer Derek Chauvin had his knee on George Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, including 2 minutes and 53 seconds after Floyd had become unresponsive. This afternoon, the county prosecutor explained why the charges came today.
We have the officer's body worn camera. We have statements from some witnesses. We have a preliminary report from the medical examiner.
According to the charging documents, police were responding to a call of Floyd using a counterfeit $20 bill.
You die.
That video, that was one I actually made myself. I forced myself to watch it. And given the circumstances, you know, everything that's happened over the past, you know, couple of months, I felt it was worth familiarizing myself with what had taken place. And then I also have friends who actually knew George Floyd from his time in Houston.
Wow.
So there was also, okay, I really want to know a little bit more about this. And when I watched the video, I mean, it's painful to watch. What really got me, in addition to that cold look from Officer Chauvin, was the other officer who was standing guard, essentially. And I just could not get past his actions and his posture during that time. Because if you look at it, he doesn't appear to really try to block the people who are videotaping what's taking place.
Absolutely.
Right.
He's more enforcing and ensuring that the process of choking and keeping the knee to Mr. Floyd's neck takes place, and essentially daring those people. You can hear them talking during that time and telling, calling him a bum, and this isn't protocol, and I went to the academy, and this is not what you're supposed to be doing. But he's essentially standing guard and daring them that, hey, if you want to move Officer Chauvin or try to prevent this from taking place, you've got to go through me and risk a potential, being charged with interfering with an arrest. If you can even get there, I'm going to stop you, and you're going to have to get an assaulting an officer charge, right, in order for you to try to do what you think is right and save Mr. Floyd's life.
Yeah.
And that was
I'm sorry, I cut you off. I apologize. Please.
No, I mean, that's just the level when you start to unpack that. If that man, that woman, or the people around there had tried to interfere and tried to save Mr. Floyd's life, of course, they're already interfering with, an official police process, but they say, you know what, this is wrong. We're going to interject. We're going to stop this from taking place because we want to save his life. We know that no matter what he's done, he didn't deserve to have a knee to his neck for whatever took place in that store. But if we want to interfere in that process, right, because we see, righteousness compels us to do this, we've got to go through another police officer who's standing guard in order to enforce the illegality that's taking place.
Yeah, I think that was extremely well put. And it also captures another thing, which is a lot of people put faith in body cameras, police body cameras. Well, this shows you that body cameras alone are not the answer. They knew they were being filmed. Everybody knew they were being filmed, and he didn't care. He didn't care.
It didn't stop anything.
It didn't stop anything.
It didn't stop Chauvin. It didn't stop the officer who was standing guard, the two other officers who were with Officer Chauvin as Officer Floyd is being. It's amazing.
Yeah, and
it is amazing.
And it was so. I think that one of the reasons that the Floyd case, I don't want to call it the Floyd case because that makes it, that sort of depersonalized. The murder of George Floyd is having the effect that it is having, is that it was so contrary to the image that a lot of white folks mostly have about the way police behave. And so, and they think that things like this, if it happens, it's isolated. It just happens in dark alleys when they think nobody's looking. The fact that it was broad daylight while being filmed, what it means is that Officer Chauvin thought he wasn't doing anything wrong.
Right.
He was just doing what he thinks is right, what he thinks he's trained to do.
Right. So, and the other officers there with him as well.
That shows that it's a systemic thing. It's not just an isolated officer. He's doing.
Let me interrupt. The first charge was third-degree murder. The next charge was second-degree murder. People were demanding first degree. Can you distinguish between the degrees of an act?
yeah, in most jurisdictions, third-degree murder means acting with reckless disregard for the risk. That's most jurisdictions. I don't recall now whether that's the case in Minneapolis. I believe so. So they're saying you create a substantial or significant risk of great bodily harm or death and act in disregard of that risk, right? Second-degree murder in most jurisdictions requires knowledge. That is, that your conduct could lead to death, and you do it anyway. First-degree murder is the most serious, and in most jurisdictions, what it means is you act intending, that is, for the purpose of causing death. Again, I'm not sure whether that's the case in Minnesota, but that's the case in most jurisdictions. So it's intent, knowledge, recklessness.
So why wasn't he charged with first degree?
I think it would be hard to prove that he wanted, that is, he intended to kill him. I think it's a better case to show, although you can look at it and certainly make that argument. What was he thinking?
Right.
But it's easier to make the argument that this is second degree, and it certainly is. Well, it certainly looks. I don't want to prejudge it. Because there hasn't been a trial yet, and
Right.
everybody is entitled to a fair trial. It's important to understand that, even Derek Chauvin. But it certainly looks like third-degree murder. My gosh, talk about a disregard of a risk.
Right. Well, and now Attorney General Ellison has brought in a number of high-profile litigators. I believe Mia Katyal was brought in this week, former Solicitor General, to help try this case. And one of the decisions or the determinations that prosecutors have to make is, particularly in high-profile cases like this, yes, there are a number of people who want the first-degree murder conviction, but you also got to weigh what are you most likely to be able to win at trial. And so if you overcharge, you can potentially lose the case in that process. So,
yeah, that's right. Look, I know Keith. Keith is a friend. We used to work together in Minneapolis. We were both part of the same office. He used to be my boss. He's a good lawyer. I think he knows what he's doing. He's not a prosecutor, but he's he was a defense lawyer like me. But he knows how to get good prosecutors there. I also know the judge, Pete Cahill. I've known Pete since he was a law student. I think that Pete will run a fair court and give the defendants a fair trial. I hope he does. I want him to get a fair trial.
Right.
You let the process unfold.
Exactly.
Well, you all have really spoken to why I'm not a lawyer, because anyway, both of you, Stephen Butler, Joe Margulis, you all have been wonderful, and especially because of my voice, I will get you again as this plays itself out, because nobody's clear to the audience, and you have gone a long way in a classroom tonight, and I thank you. This is Critical Talk.
Thank you for the invitation.
Professor Amin D. And thank you again, guys.
Thank you. It's a privilege. Take care, everyone, and be safe.
All right. Take care. Doc.